if we are bullish at the S&P and relative strength is flat also for Japan, so we should also be marginally bullish for Japan.
The equity markets have been rising in the past 2 weeks, so are you bullish?
Well, let's first look at what has made new highs. We have here on the top part the mid cap and the small cap and the mid cap, and we see that they are making new highs above the April high. And also the relative strength versus the S&P 500 has been rising. Momentum is up. So it's a relatively wide breadth rebound that we see. Also, when we looked at the Nasdaq, what we noticed is that kind of a double bottom, which occurred just with a failure of breaking this rising trend line and then sharp short covering with rising momentum.
And that's really interesting because 2 weeks ago you mentioned a bearish pattern on the S&P 500.
That's true. And we had a very nice pattern. We had a shoulder on the left side, a head, and a shoulder on the right side. And the key was to break this 2040 level on the S&P 500. And it did break just for 24 hours, not even closing below it, and reversed immediately. And we should remember that a failed bearish pattern is relatively bullish because it induced a lot of short covering. And now it broke above the 2075 level, which was the upper band, and trying to push forwards to challenge this 2111 previous high, which it should make soon.
So are you expecting this to continue for a while?
Well, look at the weekly charts. In fact, if you look now 18 months back, what we had is in April the break of a descending trend line, a pullback on it, on that trend line, a bit lower, and then sharp rebound, which is now come along with a buy signal on stochastic on a relatively medium-term basis for weekly stochastics and still rising MACD. So there is some upside momentum, and probably it will go and challenge the 2134 all-time high.
So would you focus on a specific US sector to actually drive this rebound?
For this rebound, I think there are two sectors which seems to be interesting. The first one is technology. In the month of April, technology underperformed. We see that on this orange line going down. And recently, in the last 4 weeks, it has been rebounding quite nicely. And also, it's holding a nice support trend line and challenging the previous high with, similarly for the big market, the buy signal on the stochastics and the rising MACD. The second sector, which can be interesting and has been underperforming for a longer time, has been financials, underperforming for almost a year, and now starting to rise, as we see here on this orange trend line, testing its descending resistance. Here we are just at the level where we can have the confirmation that the move is continuing on the way up with rising momentum as well.
So would you say that the situation that we're seeing here is similar to the situation in Japan?
Well, before we speak about Japan, let's look at the Euro stocks. If we look at the Euro stocks, we see a relatively triangle or neutral situation. But we should remember that, for example, if we look at the past in 2014, when there was a strong rebound, there was also a rise of the relative strength. And as the relative strength versus the S&P 500 for Europe is making a small double bottom, we probably should play the Euro stocks on the way up towards as long as this relative strength is rising. And if we want to compare the Euro stocks with the Japan, we see also a very neutral situation, but also the relative strength is flat. So if we are bullish at the S&P and relative strength is flat also for Japan, so we should also be marginally bullish for Japan.
And now taking a look at emerging markets, which area do you prefer at the moment?
There is a lot of differences between emerging markets. If we take, for example, China, the relative strength is flat, and there is not a lot of momentum, probably some resistance here. So we tend to prefer much more India. Here on a weekly basis, we see a very strong move last week, and relative strength has been moving already for the last 4 weeks. So with momentum moving up, it's probably better to focus on India than China or even Brazil, which is even looking worse. So all in all, what we should remember is that when we have a bearish pattern, what we saw on the S&P 2 weeks ago, and it failed on the downside, it is relatively bullish for the coming weeks. So we need to have this confirmation in these coming next 2 weeks.
Great. Well, Bruno, once again, thank you so much for coming in today.
You're welcome.
Bruno Estier will be back in the studio in 2 weeks' time, but in the meantime, keep up to date with all the latest market moves by clicking back to Dukascopy TV.